Hello YouTube, this is Mandak coming at you with another Guardians of the Galaxy podcast. It's a Wednesday night. My plan was actually to get this on Sunday. I actually had the script done and everything. But yeah, it's Wednesday. I should still be able to get one out on Sunday for the second volume. Be looking out for that. But anyway, all that stuff aside, we are jumping into officially the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 material, their first ongoing series. And, the title for this podcast is Guardians of the Galaxy by Jim Valentino, Volume 1. And I can say for certain, this stuff is great. We're going to talk about it a lot today. We're going to go through everything like we usually do. But this was a very solid book. I'll say that. There's a lot of good plot lines, and the biggest thing I appreciate from this whole book is that they carried over the entire team from the 70s over to this 90s reboot, ongoing series. So I'm really excited for that. Jumping in, we already know the history of these characters, so that was very easy for me to pick up and start reading. So we'll get into it. I'll go over some things real quick, as I always do with all these collections. For this one, it's a little bit smaller than the other books that we were reading before. The first one I think was like 368 pages. The second one was like around the same thing, maybe 380, whatever. This one is 328, so it's a little bit smaller book, but it reads really fast. This is early 90s. This is 90 into 91, I believe. Might still be in the 90s, I think, or 1990 at this point. But anyway, this book collects Guardians of the Galaxy numbers 1 through 7, Guardians of the Galaxy Annual number 1, Fantastic Four Annual number 24, Thor Annual number 16, and Silver Surfer number 4. Now, we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about it a little bit, but there's pretty much two main storylines in this collection. The first one is known as The Quest for the Shield, and then the second one is called Korvac Quest, which is kind of like a quasi-pseudo follow-up event, I guess you want to call that, to the Korvac saga, which was mainly in the Avengers Volume 1 material. Like the collection states, this collection is Jim Valentino. He is doing the writing duties and the art duties. Similar to Jim Starlin, Walter Simonson, Frank Miller, a bunch of different artists who have also been writers and vice versa. So, in terms of his artistry, I think it's really great. It's definitely reminiscent of his times, but I think it's pretty solid. And the writing is pretty good, I think, for these types of characters. I think Jim Valentino kind of understands the characterization here, and it's not really wonky. And we'll talk about some things. I mean, in terms of the characterization, it's not really wonky, but in terms of what happens to the characters, that's a little different. So we'll discuss that as we go along. The next thing I want to talk about here are the three different formats you can collect this book in. For me, like with all these collections, I have the trade paperback, which has all this stuff together. And like I said before, they look really nice on the shelf. That's why I bought them all like this. All the spines are similar, or all the spines are exactly alike, minus whatever it is. This one, it would say by Jim Valentino, but that's also that's a great spot. There also is a very old trade that came out that has Quest for the Shield, which collects Guardians of the Galaxy numbers 1 through 6. If you're interested in just reading that, you can try hunting that down. That being said, I have never seen it pop up anywhere. I think it's one of those old ones that is just really hard to find. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not going for really crazy prices online because no one's really going after this book. But if you just want to read the first arc, you can do that. There's also the Guardians of the Galaxy by Jim Valentino omnibus, which came out I think about a little bit over a year ago maybe, and that collects his whole run. I think it's about 29 issues, maybe more, and then he passes it over to God knows who. We'll find out later on as we go along here. But a few different formats. If you're a paperback type of person, you can get the trade. If you're a hardcover person, you can get the nice omnibus that just came out. I've seen it float around, $50-$55. So it's pretty it's pretty good for an omnibus. I think it was $125 cover price. So you're getting it for over 50% off. But omnibus change, and my plan is hopefully maybe one day when I get older, I can go back and buy this again and reread it, because it's just one of those great space books. So let me take a drink here and we'll get started. Got the water this time. Gotta stay hydrated. So we'll talk about each issue as we go along, obviously. Just like I said before, just step back and talk about this, in terms of the context of where we are. So, the Guardians have gone through all these different, stories, and, first fighting off the Badoon, liberating Earth and the rest of the solar system from the Badoon. Then you had the whole arc with that terrestrial, topographical man and all that stuff. And then, in the second volume, you had the Korvac saga as the main story, and then a bunch of crossover little event things post Korvac. So, and some of that kind of bleeds into this story, into this comic or this book as we go along, and I'll talk about that. So the first thing I want to talk about, in issue 1, is, we open up to the Guardians fighting in 3017 AD on a mud planet known as Korg. Or Kurge, I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm going to say Korg. And like I said before, it's the same team from the 1970s. And, I can't, I'm pretty sure that was Marvel's intention. It's a little weird, though, because, to be honest, the Korvac saga ended in 1978, I think 79. So at the most, at the least, the Guardians were gone for about maybe 10, 11 years. And I don't know if they were featured in anything during that time span, if they were, individual characters showed up anywhere. But at this point, it's pretty much like a solid reboot of this whole team. And I can't imagine what led Marvel to want to reboot this team and put them in their own series, nonetheless. So, we open up to them pretty much kicking ass on Korg. And they're taking down these gun turrets from a base that's on this mud planet, and they're all fighting. Charlie 27 using his big guns. Nikki using her. She has like blasters now on her wrist. Starhawk just going around blasting shit with his light. And then you have Vance, the human, 1,000-year-old man from Earth, yelling, "It's clobbering time!" And that's really cool because Vance and the Thing have a lot closer relationship now, especially after what happened in the last collection with the whole storyline with Vance talking to his younger self and unleashing the young Vance's latent powers of psychic kinetic bursts and all that stuff. So Vance and Thing have a pretty close relationship, and the Thing in general has been around the Guardians since their beginning. Has worked with them and etc. and all that stuff. Another important thing about this first issue is, this whole storyline, like I said before, is the Guardians are on a quest for the shield of Captain America, and what happened was, as it's revealed later on in the Guardians of the Galaxy annual, is that the Guardians are given this book of Antag, which has clues that lead the Guardians around the universe, the galaxy, trying to find this shield. And every time they show up somewhere, it's either a dead end or someone has already been there and has trashed the place for some reason. So the Guardians are trying to find Captain America's shield, and the Book of Antag has brought them to this planet called Korg, and they're trying to find out, okay, what's the clue that we need to get to the next step to find Captain America's shield. And obviously you have some members like Vance who are very, very much adamant about, seeing to this quest being completed. You also have other, members, Martinex, for example, who thinks this is a wild goose chase. Nothing's really going to come of it. And at this point, Martinex is actually like the leader, I guess, of the team. Actually, I'm not really sure because I know Martinex is the leader in the second volume. The Guardians really don't have a set leader. I mean, a lot of times it's understood that it's Vance since he is, looking for the shield and he's kind of heading it up. But anyway, so they land on this planet and they're confronted by this Stark, this monster who's known as a Stark. That's the race known as Taserface. And for all the fans who've watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Taserface made his MCU debut in that movie, and he was pretty much the butt of a lot of jokes. And we'll see as he goes along. He has a little bit of an arc in the next volume. He becomes this character called Overkill after what happens in this book. In a lot of ways, after he becomes Overkill, you kind of wish he was called Taserface again because Overkill is just what it is. It's Overkill. So, we get introduced to Taserface, and to be honest, the Taserface introduction opens up a bigger can of worms that we discuss later in issue 2, but I'll get to that later. Another thing we see during this battle is obviously Starhawk is in there. Starhawk being kind of like the loner figure, always going off and doing his own thing while the Guardians are busy fighting the fight that's at hand. But it always seems that Starhawk, goes away and finds a solution to the battle and comes in just at the right time to save the Guardians at the last second. So at this point, there actually is a point during this issue where we see Starhawk and Aletta actually switching bodies, and we see Aletta's new costume, and whoo boy, it's interesting. It's very 90s. Let's put it like that. It's a very big step up from what we've seen in the 70s stuff with the blue short skirt and the star belt around there and the short hair. Aletta is pretty much all over the place. A deep cut, jumpsuit with a cape in the back, and yeah. So, pretty much the rest of this issue is the Guardians kind of taking this planet, and it's taken over by these animals who are kind of like mammal looking, and they're trying to find out clues about this ship. They're trying to tell these guys that we're not here to attack you, and they kind of get, I think Yandu and one of the guys actually one of the natives gets wrapped up into a fight. So after settling all that down, the Guardians pretty much tell Yandu and Martinex to go back to the ship and kind of look through and see if they can figure out any more information about what's going on here on Korg, if they can find the clues that they're looking for. So, Yandu and Martinex go back to the ship. Each of the Guardians have a star with blue and red stripes on their chest, and those are actually used for communicators. They're used also for teleporting back to their ship, which at this point is called the Freedom's Lady. So we had the Captain America that got wrecked. We had the Freedom's Lady at this point. I think at this point, the dry dock, the station that they used for time traveling, and the one they took over after they had to take down those, after Charlie 27 had that issue where he took down all those people that were inside of, all those robots that were inside of dry dock. I think the Guardians are using that station as the time traveling station, and then they use the ship to fly around to other planets and stuff. So, we have Yandu and Martinex going back to the ship trying to figure out where this shield is, and during that time we get a whole recap of all the Guardians of the Galaxy history from the 1970s. So if you're just picking this up, and starting here, and you have no idea about what happened before with the Guardians of the Galaxy, well, you're going to find out in this issue. They go through, it's at least, I think, 3 or 4, possibly 5 pages of just recapping everything from the very beginning of the Guardians' history up until that point that we're at right now. So, I appreciate Valentino for doing that. Also during these issues, the letters pages were actually taken out, and instead there was a history lesson given. I think after the first maybe 6 issues, every issue after that, like at the back of each issue, they did a history lesson of what the Guardians were doing before this series happened. So that's even if you didn't really pay much attention to that first issue, you can still catch up on the history of the Guardians, which is pretty good. So let's see what else we got here. Like I said, they're on the hunt for this shield, and they're noticing that they're kind of picking up on some clues that someone else could be sabotaging their ability to, their ability to find this shield. And we have a whole throwdown with Taserface ambushing the Guardians, and just like his namesake, there is a point where I'm not sure who nails him down, but he actually ends up using his whole face as a laser, which was very, very accurate for his name. And the only way that the Guardians are able to neutralize Taserface is Martinex, who actually ends up freezing Taserface, and then slowly thawing out his head to allow Vance to use a psychokinetic blast to knock him unconscious. And above this planet, we find out a ship has been alerted to Taserface's defeat, and the very end of the issue ends with a whole group of female, I'm pretty sure they're all female-led warriors coming down. Some of them might be male, but a bunch of these aliens coming down dressed up in all of these suits and stuff, and they're known as the Stark. And immediately that got me wondering. I kind of could put 2 and 2 together from the type of armor they were wearing, but issue 2 pretty much it has the Guardians of the Galaxy in an all-out battle against the Stark on this planet Korg. And during the battle, the Stark take Taserface up to the ship to get repaired on. And during the battle, we have one of the Stark's minions hitting Vance and actually breaking his copper suit, which actually requires his flesh starts to age 1,000 years. That's why he's wearing the copper suit in the first place, to protect him from aging. Even though in the last freaking collection we saw him actually take off his mask and show his older self to his father back in the past, which this whole comic pretty much disregards that whole event that happened, which for me, I don't really mind. It's a minor plot point that I don't really care that much about. Personally, I think it's a little bit cooler the fact that he has to live in this copper suit. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Iron Man, when Tony was first injured and had to be in the suit. He constantly needed to be plugged in with the arc reactor. There's so many panels out on YouTube and Google that you can look up of Iron Man having to sit by a wall outlet to charge his arc reactor, because that was the burden he had to live with for a very short time. I think he got his arc reactor removed pretty early into the Iron Man ongoing. But anyway, we also get Yondu getting punched so hard by a Stark that he actually flies through the air and lands in the house of a native on this planet, and his name is Atur. And Atur is tempted to kill this guy because he's looking at Yondu and he's like, this guy looks very similar to another alien that came here a while ago and murdered my brother. And that raises some questions because obviously, as we all know from the past 2 podcasts, Yondu is the last Centaurian from his planet Centauri 4. I'm sorry. So, Yondu eventually finds out about this later on in the issue, but it's something to keep in mind and consider. Kind of setting up some more stuff to come on later on. Meanwhile, during this whole battle, we have Firelord coming through space, and at this point, Starhawk pretty much just gets up and leaves as well. He kind of, just ditches everyone and heads away and doesn't really tell anyone what's going on. Actually, wait, no, I think that's the third issue. My bad. Um, and during while we see Firelord coming through space to we're assuming help the Guardians, we also get the Watcher, who gives us a whole breakdown on the Stark, which pretty much for me I could kind of figure it out, but they explain it here anyway. So back, I don't know how many years ago it was, the Earth was invaded by Mars. I'm assuming this probably was pretty early, pretty, it was during Tony Stark's lifetime. So instead of having the Martians, get his armor and use it to take over the world and the rest of, the planets in the solar system, Tony launched his armors into space where the Martians would not get them. And the armors actually ended up landing on a small world where the creatures evolved through the Stark technology. So over time, they saw the technology, were able to develop it and create their own suits, and that were based off of Tony's design. And they show a bunch of panels where they actually have a statue of Tony Stark, you know, in their like main city or whatever, and they call themselves Stark after him in his honor. So they just talk about a bunch of other things too, how the Stark went on to obviously go and try to industrialize, mining their own planet and mining it so much that they actually needed to construct these atmospheres, these space bubbles areas where they could protect themselves from all the pollution that was on their planet. And the whole reason why the Stark are even on Korg in the first place is not because of the shield. They're there to extract resources, continue to build their empire. So, the Guardians kind of get stuck between trying to find this shield and having to battle the Stark. So, another thing we also learn about the Stark, and it's very indirect, is during the battle, Starhawk ends up turning into Aletta, and as they usually do, like I said before, it's kind of like a Captain Marvel, Rick Jones type of thing, where each of them flip bodies, and the one that isn't being used gets like put into like a limbo type of place. But when Starhawk turns into Aletta, the Stark actually do not even think about attacking her. And that kind of sets, I think Charlie 27 and Aletta off into, trying to understand how the Stark operate. And during this time also, while Aletta is over here, she ends up fending off a female Stark and actually ends up killing her with her light powers. Obviously, it's accidental. She wasn't intending to kill anyone, but I don't think she understood how powerful she was. And this is something that gets addressed over and over again with Aletta as we go along. And that's one thing I really appreciate with Jim Valentino's run is, we're giving Aletta a little bit more development versus the 1970s, where for the majority of the time Aletta was delegated to the limbo. And Starhawk pretty much got most of the time to get developed. But anyway, back on the ship, we are introduced to the Stark High Sister, which is pretty much like the queen or whatever, the league general for this whole thing. And because of that, we kind of can put two and two together about how the Stark react to women, because women are considered the most powerful and most influential people in this race. Kind of similar to the Badoon, except the Badoon women kind of set themselves apart from the Brotherhood, because they are a lot more advanced than them. But Taserface thinks that Aletta is the team's leader, and actually ends up coming back to this planet and threatens to kill her if the Guardians do not surrender. And at the very end of this issue, we actually have Aletta getting free and Aletta and Starhawk changing again, but this time there's an the Stark tried to kill them during the transition, and there's this huge cover splash page at the end that just shows a huge explosion while Aletta is getting shot by the Stark, and that's kind of where we end. So issue 3 has pretty much leaving off where we were before. Martinex actually ends up freezing Taserface again, but this time he has Nikki hostage, so Nikki's able to melt out of the the ice with her head, because she has fire on her head. During the same time, we also have Aletta and Starhawk crashing back down to Earth, and now this time they're separated. And this is really important because, for me at least, I'm not a huge fan of the whole switching identities, dual people sharing one body in a reality type of thing. I think it's kind of, the trope of having to be the person to be in that purgatory region kind of gets old after a while for me. So I'm glad that they finally just said, Jim Valentino by issue 3 is saying, let's keep these two let's keep these two separate for a while and see what we can do with them. And obviously, as we go along here, there obviously is a lot of stuff that ends up being developed with them. Aletta is then transported up to the Guardian ship, while Starhawk emerges and flies away. Like I said before, so at this time they're separated. Aletta is being helped to and being attended to in the Freedom. What's it called? What's the name of the ship? I'm sorry, Freedom's Lady. That's what it is. So Aletta is being helped by people up on the ship, and Starhawk is flying away again. And this is something that we've seen in the 1970s too. I mean, Starhawk again goes and does his own thing without telling any of the Guardians what's going on, because he's the one who knows, as we hear over and over and over again. Yondu at this point is still in this native's hut, and he comes to and he's like, if you're gonna kill me, just kill me. And Atur can't, and he gets all upset that he didn't have the guts to kill Yondu. And Yondu, being the very soft-spoken, very religious and understanding person he is, he tells Atur, he's like, being compassionate is not a sign of weakness. And we also find out, Yondu finds out firsthand that there was another Centaurian who ended up killing Atur's son. And this is important because, like I said before, Yondu is the last of his race. So the fact that he's finding out that there's another one out there that exists like him, that means a lot to him. Not just to him, but also to his, to his religion, to his deities, to his race as a whole. There's a lot of ritual tied behind it. So he is, very interested at this point. And, again, we have another panel or so or page with Firelord showing up and flies by a ship that's owned by this group known as Force. And we don't really get to see a lot of them until we get to the next issue, but we kind of hear a little bit of some of them talking, and they're thankful that Firelord didn't come by and blow up their ship, because he easily could. Firelord is extremely strong, and he can go toe-to-toe with the Phoenix any day. So, back on Korg though, where Yondu's reuniting with the Guardians. Marty's melting the ice around Nikki to free her from Taserface. And as soon as she gets free, she literally just shoots Taserface straight in the face, and the Guardians escape with a Stark general until they can find out what's going on. And the end of the issue pretty much ends with their ship getting surrounded by Stark ships, and Starhawk ends up showing back up again for no good reason at all, and finds out that the Freedom Lady has been blown up. And 3 issues in and the Guardians are dead. Oh my god. Well, if anyone has read comics, we know that there's some bullshit that happens that didn't make them die. And we find out later on here, while they were blowing up the ship, I guess, the Guardians literally just transported down and were safe. And that's really kind of dumb, but it's whatever. So Starhawk is attacking the ship, and then Firelord arrives, and Firelord tries to blow up the ship, and Starhawk is like, whoa, wait, back up. I need you to go down to the planet and see what's going on. and we have the Guardians and Firelord meeting for the first time, and during, like I said, the ship was blown up, but the Guardians transported with the general before they got down, before the ship got destroyed completely. And during the teleportation, the Stark general died, which doesn't really get addressed a lot and doesn't really get talked about a lot, but it's still a big issue because that's already 2 people that they've killed from the Stark, that within 2 issues. So that's pretty crazy. Pretty much the rest of the issue is the Guardians of the Galaxy cleaning up the Stark on this planet. Firelord shows up, and Nikki, being the Mercurian like she is, she falls in love with Firelord because he has fire too. Firelord actually ends up setting Taserface on fire and cooking him to a crisp. And to be honest, I'm a little surprised that this actually was shown in a comic. I mean, I know this is definitely past the height of the Comics Code Authority and all that stuff, and it might not have been it wasn't really graphic at that time, but the fact that I'm sorry, the fact that we have a superhero setting someone on fire is pretty scary. So the Guardians have basically kicked the Stark's ass, driven them from this planet, protected the Korg people, and on another planet called N-Tem, we are introduced a little bit more to who Force is, and they are on N-Tem. They actually find an old script that gives them a clue as to where the shield is. So at this point, we kind of find out that Force is also looking for the shield, and Starhawk. So back on Korg, we have Starhawk showing up as the Guardians are leaving, and the same old shit. The Guardians kind of question him. He's like, "Where were you? What were you doing? Like, why weren't you here to help us?" Fending off all these guys, and they're like, "Yo, I summoned Starhawk, so I summoned Firelord, so it's all good." Also in this issue, Firelord is also offered membership for the Guardians. He accepts, but he is a temporary member. He doesn't serve full time for the rest of this book, but it's still pretty cool to note. And the Guardians end up leaving, taking one of the Stark ships with them, and actually renaming it Captain America 2, which that was the name of their first ship before it got destroyed. So the 5th issue, we have the Guardians of the Galaxy showing up on the planet that the Book of Antag said the shield would be. So pretty much this whole thing on Korg was pretty much just a whole diversion that wasn't intentionally set up by Force, but was the Stark were basically just fighting the Guardians of the Galaxy to buy time for the Force to go and do stuff. Also during this time, Vance gets a new suit of adamantium, which hopefully will get rid of punctures and stuff like that in battle. On the ship that the Guardians stole, the Stark ship, we are introduced to a voice called Mainframe. And as we go along here, we find out more about Mainframe until the last issue. Well, actually issue 6 that reveals who it is, but Mainframe talks, as the Guardians are near this planet, the Mainframe explains that Force and Guardians are here, and that to gain the shield, the team that would win all these different competitions would get the shield of Captain America. So pretty much the next 2 issues is this whole contest, and we get a few matchups here. Part 1, for example, is Charlie 27 and Martinex facing off against 2 characters from Force called Broadside and Braille. Not sure how that's pronounced. Braille, for example, is from the Minions of Menace, which was actually like a lackey gang that fought for Korvac during the Guardians' initial encounter with Korvac before he transported himself back to the past. Broadside is this big alien that she's basically like the tank of the group. she actually ends up kind of having a crush on Charlie and tries, kissing him and all that stuff. And Charlie actually ends up throwing her or actually ends up like tricking her and like ends up like hitting her or something. And she ends up throwing him through a bunch of walls. Braille, on the other hand, beats the shit out of Marty and like beats his the top layer of his skin off. So like Martin X is literally laying in like crystal pieces all around him. So that's interesting. The fact that Martin X could get beat up that badly, even though his skin is made of pure glass. So the next part, and then so after both of these encounters, and with Charlie getting thrown through the walls and Martin X getting the shit beat out of him, they actually end up getting transported back to this other place after their battles are complete. Part 2 has Yondu and Nikki facing off against Photon and Scanner. And this is actually really important because we see Yondu coming face to face with another Centaurian in Photon, who is a female. We learn more about her backstory in the second volume, so I'll save it for that. But we get a long story, a long kind of moment here where Yondu cannot attack Photon because she is a Centaurian, just like him. And we learn a little bit more about the rituals of Centauri 4, where instead of wedding bands, these creatures give their significant others earrings, which I thought is cool. And at the end, Yondu is faced with defeat because he cannot attack her, and because he cannot kill her because she's one of him, and he needs her. It's their destiny if something happens that they need to repopulate. So that's kind of what that is. Like I said, in the second volume, we'll dig a little bit deeper into that whole relationship between Photon and Yondu. It's not what you would think it would be. It's a little bit deeper, but it's a really cool arc and storyline nonetheless. And then we have Nikki facing off against this like alligator type of creature called Scanner. Not a really original name in my opinion, but Nikki is one of the very few people in this whole group who she ends up defeating her enemy soundly, and is just about to kill him before she is transported. So, we have these two transported back to the same spot where Martin X and Charlie 27 were transported back, and all the Guardians are, wrapped around and told, after Yondu and Nikki get teleported back, they end up getting teleported back to a scene of Charlie 27 trying to save Martin X because apparently he's dying from the battle with Braille. So that's kind of where that issue ends on a very somber note. Next issue, we continue the contest. Part 3 is Starhawk and Aletta versus 85 and Tachyon. 85 is actually a Kree warrior who looks a lot like Corsair. For anyone who doesn't know who Corsair is, that is actually Alex and Scott Summers' father from Earth. He's from Earth, obviously, but he lives in outer space. He's part of a group called the Starjammers, which are very crucial in the early going days of the Claremont X-Men run. But yeah, anyway, getting back to it, 85 is like a Kree warrior that looks like Corsair, kind of has like the headband and all that stuff. Tachyon, I don't really know much about, other than the fact I think he can teleport and do stupid stuff like that. But before we even get the battle, we get a whole discussion with Aletta kind of bitching out Starhawk for letting their children die back in Marvel Presents number 11. And that whole storyline is in that first podcast, so if you want to go back and check that real quick, that's great. But pretty much what happened was, we actually had a villain kidnapping their children, and Starhawk was so drained from being attacked by this villain that he couldn't save the children. And according to Aletta, she thinks that Starhawk could have done more, even though he was very weak at the time. So the battle kind of commences after that. So that's a really good moment. I mean, it kind of shows the status of where Aletta and Starhawk are now at this point in their relationship. Obviously, Aletta doesn't appreciate being in the void for so long while Starhawk is over there kicking ass and stuff. But at the same time, she still blames Starhawk for the children's death back in over 15 years ago. So 85 ends up wrapping up Aletta in like tentacles. He's kind of like has powers like Magneto. Tachyon actually ends up repelling Stakar's light blast from his from his arms and stuff like that. So they're both kind of soundly defeated as well, and they're both teleported back to the same place where they meet the other ones. At this point, Marty is healing, and they're all transported back to the ship where they are, both the Force's characters and the Guardians characters are, in the stands watching the final battle between Vance, Astro, and Interface. Which, that's kind of why I assume that Vance is the leader during this arc right here, is because he's saved for the last, and pretty much the battle begins with the two of them fighting against each other, and Interface ends up beating the shit out of Vance even with his adamantium suit, and ends up getting the shield. And Interface can't understand why the shield is so valued. I think he was expecting something different with the shield, and realizes it's just a piece of metal. And he ends up throwing it to the ground, giving it up, and pretty much saying like, I don't want this item. It has no meaning for me. And that's where Vance picks it up, and is about to attack Interface. Vance has this whole deep monologue going on about what the shield represents, all this stuff. I mean, you can kind of understand what it is, but nonetheless, it's a really cool story because as you go along here, the Guardians do that with a lot of things. A lot of their storylines are kind of driven around how the current Marvel Universe has evolved into the current timeline we're in now with the Guardians, and I think that's really cool. And this is a very very subtle and a very innocent way of doing it. It's not pounding you over the head with Marvel lore. It's literally just a MacGuffin that they're chasing after, with something as iconic as the shield of Captain America. So at the end of this, Vance ends up getting the shield. And, as we see throughout the rest of this run, probably, Vance will hold on to the shield and use it in battle, which is always really cool to see. So he's about to attack Interface with this shield, and he's transported back to the ship as well with the other Guardians. And Force is pretty much left to lick their wounds. They've been pretty much embarrassed, and they've left without their prize. So we get another discussion from Mainframe, and it's revealed that Mainframe is actually Vision, which again is another example of them using, ongoing character stuff and tying it into the current timeline that's 1,000 years later. So I think that's really cool. And he goes over like all the different contests and what people failed in and why they did it and all that stuff. So now the Guardians have found the shield. Well, the next mission they decide on is, the mission that they ever thought about doing, and that was trying to go after and try to find the last remaining human colony. Because at this point, Badoon have pretty much come and eliminated almost all the humans on Earth. Only a small group remains, and the Guardians' next mission is to go out and discover that human colony and see if there's any hope for them to repopulate and start the human race over again, I guess. Sorry, I'll take a drink there, but that storyline doesn't really get addressed until the next collection. But I'll just talk about issue 7 real quick. So issue 7 is kind of an in-between state issue. It's not really the start of another arc. Issue 8, though, kind of picks up the next arc, which we'll talk about in the next collection. But this whole story, during this time, we have Martin X getting healed up from his battle against Braille, and then we also have the rest of the Guardians on the ship. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the Starhawk half of this issue, because number one, we've already talked about it on the first volume of this podcast. The whole origin of Martin X, or the whole origin of Starhawk and Aletta, etc. What I will say though about this issue is it's very reminiscent of an Iron Man issue I read in one of the Epic collections that I just recently got done reviewing, which was the Doom Epic collection. There was a story similar in setup to this, where you had a story going on the top of the page that panned over 2 pages and kept going, and you also have a story on the bottom that panned over and went going throughout the whole thing. So I'm not sure, I don't know if anyone out there has ever read an issue like that before, but I wasn't sure if I had to read the top story across the 2 pages first and then go down and read the other one, or if I was supposed to read each page, the first story, then the second story, first story, the second story. I ended up choosing the first option because I thought that would make the most sense. It would be a lot less hopping around. But yeah, I'm just curious what other people do for that type of stuff. And that's kind of how it is here. So we have Charlie and Nikki teleporting to a nearby ship to see what's up. They're kind of floating through space trying to find the last colony. And they run across a room full of preserved bodies on this ship that is sailing nearby them. And one of the bodies resembles Mephisto, which we know is pretty much Marvel's version of the devil, and it's a woman body, and it's a little weird. She ends up actually waking up and asking for a child, and then ends up actually boarding the Guardian ship and attacking them. During this whole fight, there's a few pages where they just fight it all out and stuff like that. During the fight, though, this devilish creature, she ends up actually seeing Aletta and tells her that she is the rival and that they will fight. Which, again, is more set up for what's to come later on as we get into this run. And later on we actually end up finding in this issue that the character's name that this person is Malevolence. Which makes sense. I mean, I guess you got Mephisto as a devil, and then you have Malevolence as the daughter. She ends up destroying the Guardians, tries to get into the sick bay to attack Starhawk to eliminate his power. When he emerges and tells Malevolence that the child is not here yet and that she must leave. So, we're given a lot of information. We don't have any context behind it, but it does get cleared up as we go along here. So, rest easy, true believers. And yeah, so after she ends up leaving, the Guardians again are kind of at an end now. They're kind of like, talking to Starhawk to be like, okay, what does that mean? Who is this child? Why is she after you? And more importantly, why are they after us? Because you're part of us now. And he won't tell them. And this whole secretive, kind of Lone Ranger shit that Starhawk does, it comes to a boil eventually, and for good reason. I mean, Starhawk kind of can't just go over and do his own thing. So Martin X is given a new skin at the end, and again, this also has some implications later on. Martin X and Starhawk kind of get a one-on-one moment where Martin X can kind of sympathize a little bit with Starhawk and his story and understand why he does the thing he does. But for right now, the rest of the Guardians are still a little bit kind of a little bit upset with him. So those are the 7 issues in that book. Like I said before, you have Quest for the Shield, which is 1 through 6, and then you have this one issue, which is kind of a tie-over issue until you get to the next arc. So the rest of this book is the annuals that all tie in and create pretty much the Korvac Quest crossover. So basically, just to talk about it in general, the Korvac Quest is kind of addressing a loophole or something that happened in the Korvac saga. So during the Korvac saga, the Avengers ended up eventually finding out where he lived in Forest Hills, attacked him, and eventually Korvac lost his life fighting the Avengers. And what we find out is before he died, he actually was able to transfer his consciousness in like an energy body to escape being destroyed by Galactus, because Korvac was able to sense that Galactus was sending this nullifier ray to destroy Korvac once and for all. Even with his human body, destroy his mental energy, all that stuff. And pretty much what we're told instead was during this fight, Korvac actually transferred his consciousness and his energy into like a ball that kind of floated throughout space, while his body just got struck by this nullifier ray. So that, as it goes along here, Korvac pretty much killed himself and restored all the Avengers, and it has this energy source flowing through the 20th century to inhabit his ancestors, so that he will be born again so when he becomes born again in the year, I think it's like 2977 or something, he will become Korvac again. So it's pretty interesting. It's a little hard to wrap your head around a little bit, because they're talking about how he was able to transfer his body, and there's a lot of time travel going on and all that stuff. The Fantastic Four annual kind of talks about this a lot. Pretty much half the book's discussing this whole origin and what's happening. We also see that Guardians open up to fighting the Badoon, and this is, obviously set before this whole ongoing series, because the Badoon are no more anymore. The Guardians were able to drive the Badoon away from the Earth and the solar system. And during this fight, during one of the fights of the Badoon back in the 1970s, Starhawk has a premonition that something is up with regards to Korvac, and he can kind of sense it. And the Guardians end up going back through time to go see the Fantastic Four and Hank Pym and try to stop Korvac from either sending his energy through space before he dies, or inhabiting a ancestor of him. And the rest of the issue is pretty much the Fantastic Four, the Guardians, trying to stop this woman called Jaboa Murphy from inheriting the power of Korvac, because she is a descendant. So basically what happens is the Fantastic Four go to Australia to try to stop this woman from getting hit by this power, and she ends up actually getting hit by it. So what Reed Richards does is he actually creates a gateway to go teleport back to the moment at the same time when Korvac was fighting the Avengers, and deflects the power that Galactus shot through space to kill Korvac, and actually deflects that and kills Jaboa Murphy and transfers the energy somewhere else. And the Guardians know this too. They get done fighting and they're like, we still have not yet destroyed Korvac. I think Starhawk probably says something like, I can still sense him out there. Accept the knowledge of the one who knows. Stupid shit like that he says all the time. So that's pretty much the Fantastic Four issue. And the next two issues are pretty much kind of the same type of example. The Guardians are going around through space trying to stop this Korvac energy from transferring from generation to generation. So we get to Thor Annual number 16, where it's like a future dystopian society. I'm not exactly sure what year it is. Oh, actually, yeah. The only clue we get is that this is during the 26th century. So it's a little bit further on, obviously past the 20th century, but not getting into the year 3000 yet. And at this point, Thor is this guy named Dargo Couture, and he is pretty much a guy going around, stopping criminals, but also working this menial job, during his time off without being Thor. And at his work, there's actually a character called Varley who gets ridiculed and made fun of, despite being the supervisor for a mail distribution center. So it's later revealed that Vance is actually a descendant of, or not descendant, a ancestor of Korvac, and he actually ends up getting the power of Korvac, and the Guardians end up showing up, fighting Varley, killing him, and what's else? So the Guardians end up actually fighting, getting placed into these crystal pods. Thor ends up coming along, freeing them, fighting Warley, or not Varley, I'm sorry. Varley almost eats Charlie with like a giant mouth that he creates. And also, this guy's not screwing around either, because Yondu tries shooting an arrow at him to kill him, and the arrow actually ends up just vaporizing from his power. And basically the way they end up destroying Varley is they actually use a portal that Varley shoots his energy into, and Thor basically created that portal to suck in that energy and shoot it right back out and kill him, destroying him. Like a common trope in comics, if the only thing that's going to hurt an enemy is themselves. So that's pretty much what they did here with this issue. The next issue, Silver Surfer Annual number 4. We open to Silver Surfer coming back from a mission and being with Shala Bale, his love interest at the time, and he has this whole dream that he's going to be with her, and it ends up just being a dream. And he's it turns out that in the year 3000 or near to it, the Silver Surfer is pretty much chilling on this planet with a guy named the Marshak. I don't know how you pronounce it. Excuse me, but the Marshak can feel this energy flowing through the universe, a very ominous energy, and ends up sending Silver Surfer out to go see what this energy is. And it's out here in space where we see the Guardian's ship flying through space, and we see the Silver Surfer come up near on their radars. And the Guardians actually end up picking up on the energy signatures of the Silver Surfer and end up tracing it back to a planet where they were living on. And the reason why the Guardians pick up this energy and follow it is because it is reminiscent of, it's indicative of, could be something that is Korvac at this time. So they end up coming back to this planet. The Guardians try to find out, okay, where's this Korvac energy coming from? And the Silver Surfer and the Guardians end up having a big fight. I will say it's a pretty cool fight. There are some things that happen that kind of screw stuff up. We have all the Guardians kind of teaming up and trying to destroy the Silver Surfer and kind of getting him to notice why they're there and why they need to kind of confront the Marshak, which at this point they believe possesses the power of the Korvac character. So the Guardians end up shooting Silver Surfer together, and the Silver Surfer actually ends up deflecting that energy and shooting it back, and killing this whole a bunch of kids in this like church or school or whatever. So after that, the Marshak kind of emerges and reveals himself as possessing the power of Korvac, and for this it's a lot less malicious compared to the other two. This guy was using this power solely for creation, was not using it for evil purpose. Excuse me. For evil purposes or anything like that. He was just using it to keep his wife young, but he agrees to relinquish his power, and the minute he relinquishes it, he ages a while, and his wife also, and they end up dying, which is a little sad and tragic at the same time. But it kind of puts the wheels in motion about how, no matter how hard the Guardians try to isolate this Korvac energy, it always ends up escaping them, until we get to the last issue of this collection, which is Guardians of the Galaxy Annual 1. Now, again, we're back. We're traveling through time. At this point, we're traveling from the 20th century all the way through to now, which is 2977, which is the year of Korvac's birth on Earth's moon, no less. And like I said before, Korvac is, his backstory is a little interesting. He ended up becoming a brilliant scientist that worked for the Badoon, and the Badoon grew jealous and weary of his knowledge, and ended up blowing something up in his lab, paralyzing and creating a cyborg out of Korvac and making him less powerful than he could have been. So anyway, we end up seeing the Guardians on the ship saying pretty much, this is our last shot, guys. If we don't kill him here, if we don't stop him here, then we're screwed pretty much. So the Guardians try to go and try to stop Korvac, but in their way they're attacked by this guy named Korvac, and they're like, this doesn't look like Korvac. Ends up turning out to be Jordan Korvac, who is Michael Korvac's father. And he ends up finding the galaxies, or the Guardians, I'm sorry. Starhawk is fighting Jordan, and during the fight, he actually changes back into Aletta. At this point too, I think Jordan is pretty much, defeated, and at this point the Watcher shows up and explains to the Guardians, hey, you guys are doing a lot of dicking around with the timeline. I just want to let you know what's going on. And even despite the fact that this energy source is floating through space and time, Korvac is born and ends up actually. Now I think about it, during the fight, Jordan Korvac actually ended up possessing the power of the Korvac and ended up coming and possessing him. And once his father dies, Korvac actually ended up absorbing that power as a baby. And I'll tell you right now, there are some really weird panels where we see the baby Korvac floating in midair with like purple, yellow, orange flames flying throughout and all that stuff. It's pretty weird. But just as this baby's about to attack the Guardians, the Guardians are transported onto Galactus' ship, where they decide whether or not they should kill Korvac. At this point, he's kind of, he's absorbed the powers of his father, but he hasn't really turned malicious yet. And the Guardians all toss around what they should do with him. Should they kill him? Should they, let him go, since he is just an innocent baby? And they ended up, obviously just returning the baby back to the mom, because the way they see it, and from what the Watcher told them, that was what they had to do. If they didn't do that, then they could have jeopardized the whole time continuum, etc. And we get a good tragic type of thing, kind of just talking about time travel in general, how no matter how hard you're trying to change it, there's theories out there where, just like we heard in X-Men Days of Future Past, no matter how hard you sometimes try to change the past, the future ends up being the same anyway, because there's a theory that you throw a rock into a stream, the stream eventually just keeps moving. So we get a good time or moment here where we have Michael Korvac's mom finally being reunited with her son, and saying a bunch of stuff, swearing that Korvac will grow up to destroy the Guardians, be their mortal enemy. And that's kind of what we leave off with the Thor annual in the second collection. So we also get some other, on a less somber note, I guess, we get a lot of other stuff in this issue. We get Aletta being given official membership as a Guardian. The epilogue for this is just more set up for the quest for the shield. So I'm a little curious as to why this was, in the order that's shown in the collection, this comes at the very end. And I'm a little curious as to why, because all the events that happen in this book, and in these 4 annuals here that create this crossover, they're all tied back to before this team even started. But instead we're starting with issue 1, which all the information from this crossover event comes before that. So I'm a little curious as to why they saved it for the back here. And we just get a bunch. There's a bunch of different things too. We get a backup story where the Guardians discover this human outpost on Europa, and they get their. And it also explains kind of how they got their new costumes. If you can remember, Charlie 27 wore this big yellow, kind of like astronaut suit with an astronaut helmet on top. Vance's suit was more purplish than anything else. Who else am I missing? Well, March Nexus walks around naked because who cares? And Yondu has been pretty consistent in his appearance the whole time as well. But that is everything. So, like I said, overall, this book is pretty solid. It obviously hits the ground running, with the first issue, and gets you up to speed, even if you haven't read the earlier stuff. But like I said before, Jim Valentino, just like a lot of great writers, he's planting little seed stories that he wants to explain later on. With the malevolent stuff, searching for the first human colony. He set up a lot of stuff, and I'm curious to see where they go and how he handles them. But that's pretty much my whole podcast, guys. So next week, be expecting Guardians of the Galaxy by Jim Valentino Volume 2. After that, we'll get into Volume 3, and then we'll have 3 more volumes of tomorrow's Avengers, I believe. So a lot more reading there, and then, as we go forward, we'll do Abnett and Lanning's run, and we'll get into Bendis as well. So we still have a lot more to go, but I'm glad we're on the 3rd episode at this point. Let me know what you guys think about this whole thing. I guess something to prompt maybe discussion in the comments is who's one of your favorite artists / writers in comic book industry. I know there's a lot of them. You have Frank Miller, Jim Valentino for this book at least. So there's a lot of good stuff. So that is everything. So again, like I want to say, it's 1 hour and 6 minutes. I want to say thank you so much for listening throughout this whole thing. I hope you guys have learned a little bit more about the Guardians. And like I said, be looking out for next week's podcast. So see you guys on the flip side. Bye.